Thank you so much, Janaki. That was absolutely amazing. It was beautiful. But before we let you go, and thank you so much for really getting us started with two such amazing national anthems, both countries that all of us Australian Indians absolutely love, the country of birth and country of origin. But Janaki, before you go, can I ask you a question, which I've been wanting to ask you for a very long time? Can you imagine you're standing there on the stage, you've got four judges from Keith to Rita Oria to Guy Sebastian to Jessica, every one of them trying to sell themselves to you and asking you to join them. What were your thoughts? What was going through your mind when you were standing there and seeing all those judges wanting you to join them? Can you share with us?
Yeah. I was definitely really overwhelmed. I didn't expect to get all four chair turns. And at the end when they were all pitching for me and saying, "Oh, this is why you should be in my team" and stuff, I was so confused because originally I did want to go with Jess, but Guy was pitching so well, so I was like, should I go with Guy? But then, my mum reassured me and was like, you should go with Jess. Like she said number one. So Jess was my number one choice. So I ended up going with her. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. In fact, I'm so glad you actually mentioned that, because that again comes back to a lot to do with our culture, isn't it? Where we really do respect our parents and also recognize that whatever they advise us is really for our best. But I'm glad also you felt that Jess was the right one for you. Thank you so much. And we wish you all the best. And I'm sure not just in Australia, I'm sure you'll be making a pretty good name for yourself across internationally. And thank you, Janaki, and we'll see you shortly again. Thank you for being with us today. I might now take the opportunity to invite Jim Varghese, Australia-India Business Council National Chair. Jim has certainly taken AIBC to an all-new level. I have to say, as an immediate past national chair, I feel really happy when I see how AIBC has gone forward. And that's exactly what you want. And Jim, over to you. Jim's, I really don't want to read out his CV. He's pretty well known. He's the chairman and owner of the leadership company, but more importantly, he sits on a whole lot of other boards, industry as well as government. Jim's been very involved with the Australia-India Business Council. He's set up a whole lot of industry chapter chairs and taken the council to an all-new level. And Jim, over to you for the formal welcome for this annual India Address 2021. Thank you.
Greetings to all our audiences here in Australia, India, and internationally. And we're delighted that the Australia-India Business Council, together with India News, is live streaming this whole session in all forms of social media. So before I commence the proceedings today, I'd like to give a greetings, a formal welcome to country for our First Nations people here in Australia. So in the spirit of reconciliation, the Australia-India Business Council acknowledges the traditional custodians of the country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. We pay our respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. It's now I'd like now to acknowledge some of our very important attendees today, starting, of course, with the Honourable Tony Abbott, the former Prime Minister of Australia, and of course, the Prime Minister Morrison's Special Trade Envoy to India, His Excellency, Mr. Manpreet Vohra, the High Commissioner of India to Australia, Junior Lisa, the Member of Parliament and Chair of Friends of India, Harsh Shah, the India Services Group, Deloitte Australia, and our key sponsor, Ambassador Anil Wadhwa, the former Secretary of East MEA, India, and author of the Australia Economic Strategy, Manish Gupta, the Consul General of India in Sydney, the Honourable Lisa Singh, former Senator and Deputy Chair of the Australia-India Council, Andrew Stoner, the former Deputy Premier of New South Wales, Archana Singh, the Honorary Consul of India in Queensland, Shiva Nandikiwala, of course, who introduced me earlier, our immediate past national chair, Dipin Rugani, our former AIBC national chair, Shunushka Siamangal, our national vice chair for the AIBC, and of course, all my AIBC board members and directors and industry chapter chairs. Of course, our special performer, Janaki Asma, she did a magnificent job singing. It was absolutely inspiring. And of course, distinguished guests attending the annual address and all attendees, one and all. Can I just say that this is a very important event, for celebration of the Independence Day, which is the 75th Independence Day on August the 15th. We are delighted to host the signature Australia-India address to coincide with these celebrations. It is a signature event for us, and it's an opportunity to attract trade and investment, government representatives, key industry stakeholders and dignitaries. We have been fostering trade for 35 years with the launch of the India Economic Strategy to 2035 and the Australia Economic Strategy. Our relationship with India is set to grow exponentially. The comprehensive strategic partnership signed by Prime Minister Scott Morrison and Prime Minister Narendra Modi has far-reaching implications for this relationship. And it's great that the Honourable Tony Abbott is here to pursue that. So let me just make these quick points. With the renewed commitment of both governments to work more closely to track up the bilateral relationships to its next level, the AIBC is committed to supporting the government and industry stakeholders to make this happen. In the past, AIBC has been an active contributor to CCA, the FTA discussions. We are committed to facilitating an early free trade agreement or a CCA between the two countries. We look forward to working closely with the governments of both countries towards this very important goal. So without further ado, I'll introduce Sheba, our immediate National Past Chair, to introduce the Honourable Tony Abbott. You've seen her profile, a very impressive profile, a person with extraordinary energy and commitment to the Australia-India relationship. Over to you, Sheba.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jim. It is absolutely a pleasure. In fact, more than a pleasure, it's a privilege to introduce Honorable Tony Abbott. But before I do so, Jim, I would like to thank you for all the hard work, the strategic thinking, and the amount of contribution that you have been making towards AIBC through your leadership, which has taken the organization and the council really forward. Nothing pleases a former chair and especially an immediate past national chair when you see the organization racing ahead. Thank you for that, which I would formally like to place on record. It is indeed a privilege to introduce Honorable Tony Abbott, former Prime Minister of Australia, as a keynote speaker today. His bio is already there, right there in front of you to read, so I'm not going to be repeating it. But what I would like to share is definitely something a little bit more in terms of a personal perspective, as well as an AIBC perspective. It was quite interesting that when I met Mr. Abbott for the first time, and he will remember it, it was almost 20 years ago when I first migrated. I remember meeting him and going for a meeting where he was a health minister. And I also remember being pretty shocked when I saw that he actually drove in an old Toyota car. And I actually got to meet him and I said, oh my God, I would never have imagined this to happen from the country I'm coming. And he says, a car is a car. It has to get you to X, from X to Y. And boy, that was my first learning in Australia that, one just has to be grounded in order to really contribute. So amazing lesson learned. I had the opportunity to actually work very closely with him when I was the National Vice Chair and thereafter also as the Chair. And prior to that, as the New South Wales President, when I had the opportunity to first invite him as the keynote speaker for our AIBC annual address, and I think it was the year 2013, he was the leader of the opposition. I still remember him starting his speech in which he said, if I was to become the Prime Minister of Australia, India would be my priority. And I still remember so many think tanks actually brought out papers after that particular event. That commitment has not reduced. In fact, it has increased by the years. And I'm so very pleased to be able to introduce and welcome him as the keynote speaker for our event today. As especially he has just returned from India as a special trade envoy, where he represented our Prime Minister Scott Morrison to have some high-level talks about how to take our bilateral business and trade relationship to its next level. How opportune is it for us to hear straight from him what happened in India and what is the perspective of Australian government going forward regarding this relationship. May I now welcome Honorable Tony Abbott to take the stage and deliver our keynote address for AIBC Australia-India Annual Address 2021. Thank you. Over to you, Mr. Abbott.
Well, Sheba, it's lovely to be here. Thank you for that lovely introduction. And thank you to Jim for his splendid work chairing the Australia-India Business Council. I do want to begin by saying that I really do hope that the next time this eminent body meets, we can meet face to face. As someone who is currently in hotel prison, having just returned from the United Kingdom and India, I am sick to death of having the ordinary freedoms we take for granted removed from us, albeit to keep us safe, albeit for our own good. But nevertheless, it would be nice to go back to a more normal world where all of the ordinary features of life, including travel, are once more given to us. So, having got that out of the way, as we are marking the anniversary of Indian independence, I probably should begin by paying tribute to the government and people of India for an extraordinary 7.5 decades. When India became independent on the midnight hour, all those years ago, many people doubted the longevity of Indian democracy, but as time has gone by, India's democracy has just got stronger and more vigorous. And whatever you might think about individual Indian governments or individual Indian leaders, there is absolutely no doubt that India today is an extraordinarily vibrant, vigorous, and pluralist democracy, and that is something of which every Indian can be proud. I should also acknowledge and thank the 700,000 or so Australians of Indian background who are making such a wonderful contribution to our country. They are great ambassadors for Australia to India, and they are great ambassadors for India to Australia. And I'm proud to include so many of them amongst my own friends. Now, what I really want to do today is firstly to report to the Business Council on where things stand in terms of the free trade agreement between Australia and India. And second, and perhaps more importantly, I want to ask everyone here today for your support to make this a reality. The time now is right for this to happen in a way that it has never been before, because as we know, looking around the world, things are changing. They're changing fast. They're not necessarily changing to the advantage of the great democracies. India, as I have so often said, is the world's emerging democratic superpower. And by God, don't we need another democratic superpower in the world right now? And isn't it so important that a country like Australia do everything it can to help ensure that India does take its rightful place right up there at the head of the world's great democracies. Now, I've just come back from a week in India. It was a very crowded week. I should thank and acknowledge our High Commissioner, Barry O'Farrell, for his friendship and also for his extraordinary work to help me in this remarkable week. I spent a lot of time with Indian business leaders, a lot of time with India's leading thinkers and think tanks. I met with ministers, and of course, I was extraordinarily fortunate and honoured to have a long and discursive discussion with Prime Minister Narendra Modi. The two key meetings, of course, from the point of view of the long-awaited and much laboured over India-Australia free trade deal, were with Minister Sitharaman, the previous Trade Minister, who I have to say was remarkably positive when I sat down with her for an hour in Delhi the other day. And then, of course, with the new Trade Minister, Minister Piyush Goyal, who I have to say strikes me absolutely as someone that we can do business with. And it was a real privilege for myself, for Barry O'Farrell, for the leading staff of our High Commission in Delhi to sit down not just with Minister Goyal, but with the Secretary of his department, his chief negotiator, and his key advisors. And out of that meeting is a clear commitment by both India and Australia to put their best teams to work urgently on bringing this trade negotiation to at least an interim conclusion as quickly as possible. Obviously, we have Minister Dan Tehan, who I thank very much for a long-standing friendship, as well as for the confidence he's shown in me in more recent times. We have Minister Tehan going to India quite shortly to sit down with Minister Goyal. That will be a very important meeting. And then both Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Morrison have made a commitment to meet in person, at the very least as part of the in-person Quad Summit, which is scheduled to happen or is hoped to happen before the end of the year. And I also know that Prime Minister Morrison is very, very keen indeed to take up Prime Minister Modi's invitation to visit India as soon as possible. Now, to get back to trade, as things stand, most of India's exports to Australia come in without tariffs or quotas, and those that do attract a quota, it's a comparatively small 5%. Most of Australia's exports to India, on the other hand, are subject to tariffs and quotas. They're not all particularly high. For instance, our coal exports face only a 2.5% tariff, but our wine exports face an extraordinary 150% tariff, and really this is a little bit unreasonable. What we should be hoping for before the end of the year, at the very least, is an early harvest agreement on the principal goods that pass between our two countries. There are 100 tariff lines that constitute about 98% by value of our two-way trade. And I very much hope that the negotiating teams on both sides can move those 100 lines to zero, or at least onto a pathway to zero as part of this early harvest agreement. Now, I don't want us to stop with an early harvest agreement. There is so much more to be done to develop the comprehensive strategic partnership that now exists in name between our two countries, but which needs to be fleshed out so much in the months and years and decades ahead. And in the economic sphere, obviously, we want deeper partnerships in education. We want deeper partnerships in technology. And we certainly want partnerships in the strategic minerals and rare earths that India is so determined to have as part of its own Make in India campaign and as part of its determination to avoid strategic dependence on its large neighbour on the other side of the Himalayas. I know how easy it is for trade negotiations to get bogged down. I know how trade negotiators have a tendency to approach trade negotiations as a zero-sum game. But I do think, particularly after my discussions with Minister Goyal, that on both sides there is an appreciation of the strategic as well as the economic imperative to bringing this particular stage of our relationship to a swift and satisfactory conclusion. Certainly, for my part, as a minister in the Howard government, then as Prime Minister, subsequently as a former Prime Minister and a trade facilitator, I am conscious of the fact that trade is not a zero-sum game, particularly with countries that are like-minded. Unilateral free trade is of itself an advantage, but certainly bilateral free trade is of wonderful benefit to both the partners. I'm also conscious of the fact that even though Australia's GDP is currently still roughly half that of India's, our population is 1/50th of that of India's. So over time, any deal with India will be of extraordinary importance to Australia. Now, obviously, this is all taking place in the context of great shifts in the wider world. As Prime Minister, I was very keen to revive and revitalise the quadrilateral security dialogue linking the United States, India, Japan and Australia. I was delighted when Prime Minister Modi was, if anything, even more enthusiastic about the Quad. It's wonderful that there has been a virtual Quad summit earlier this year, and it's very important that we have this in-person Quad summit at the earliest possible opportunity. I'm also pleased that there are now regular 2x2 meetings between the foreign ministers and defence ministers of Australia and India, and there'll be one of these taking place in the next couple of months. As we speak, ships from India, Japan, the United States and Australia are exercising near Guam as part of the Malabar naval exercises to which Australia is now, I like to think, a regular invitee. Not only are the ships of the Quad exercising together, but there is a powerful United Kingdom task force centred on the British flagship HMS Queen Elizabeth participating in these exercises. And I think that sends a very strong signal, not of aggression towards anyone, but of the great democracies standing together in the cause of freedom, standing together in support of a rules-based world order at a time when it faces many challenges. I've always thought that India and Australia are natural partners. We have democracy, the rule of law, to some extent the English language, and to a great extent a sporting enthusiasm and heritage in common. And our soldiers, it's often forgotten, fought together not just at Gallipoli, but in North Africa and Malaya. We have a lot of history, a proud history, as well as an even brighter future ahead of us as two countries. I've said it before, let me say it again. I want to devote a very substantial part of my post-parliamentary life to building the partnership between Australia and India. I'm conscious of the part that previous Prime Ministers, such as Bob Hawke and Paul Keating, played over recent decades building the economic relationship between Australia and China. But as we know, that particular relationship is now suffering hard times. I have always thought that there was far more natural synergy between Australia and India than between Australia and China. And I hope that all of us can focus at least as much in the future on a partnership with India as in the past we may have focused, perhaps over-focused, on a partnership with China. But in the end, nothing happens because of just one individual. Everything worthwhile is a team effort. So I do hope that while people like myself do the best we can, every single one of you listening today will see yourself as an advocate for an ever stronger partnership between Australia and India to the great and everlasting benefit of both our countries. Thank you, Sheba.
Thank you very much, Honourable Tony Abbott. That was a very excellent address, and we're very appreciative of it. And thanks, Sheba, also for that very great introduction to Tony Abbott, and of course, your own great contribution to be recognised here today as well. Can I now take this opportunity to introduce His Excellency, Mr. Manpreet Vohra, the High Commissioner of India to Australia. As you can see, there's a very impressive profile. He's made already a very big impact coming in here to Australia. He was on an official visit to Queensland and was there very beginning with trade, helping us host a India Tech Hub event to attract the biggest and the best IT companies to invest in the knowledge Springfield in Springfield. So over to you, Your Excellency.
Thank you, Jim, very much. I'd always reckoned that it will be a difficult task for me to follow after as erudite and passionate a speaker as the Honourable Tony Abbott. And I know now that it is practically impossible. Thank you, Mr. Abbott, for that wonderful address. It is good to see you again, sir. And thank you, AIBC, for organizing this event and for inviting Mr. Abbott, whose recent visit to India on an important and focused mission made it so topical and relevant for all of us to listen to him. May I also acknowledge the presence of the Honourable Julian Leeser, Chair of the Australia-India Parliamentary Group, whose article in The Australian 2 days ago on our 75th Independence Day supplements and reinforces what Mr. Abbott himself has discussed in India and what he wrote about in the newspaper a few days after returning. It is also very, very nice to see so many of the other colleagues, guests, and friends, and Jim has already acknowledged each and every one of you. Our keynote speaker, Mr. Abbott, has for long been an ardent advocate of closer ties between India and Australia, and we thank him for that. Our comprehensive strategic partnership, elevated to this level last year, is an acknowledgement of our shared challenges, opportunities, and objectives, both bilaterally and in our common Indo-Pacific region. Today, India and Australia see eye to eye on most major international issues and find each other to be natural partners. there is a growing convergence of views on geostrategic and geo-economic issues, and a strong desire to work together for a secure and prosperous region. Our political and strategic pillars of the relationship have already matured quite rapidly, as have our educational, sporting, cultural, and people-to-people links. In fact, Prime Minister Scott Morrison, in his greetings to us on the occasion of our Independence Day last weekend, he summarized it beautifully when he said, and I quote, "Our Maitri, or friendship, our Maitri endures because we have so much in common. As proud democracies, we are bound by a commitment to respect, responsibility, and rule of law. We believe that the dignity of our people lies at the heart of who we are. Ours is an Indo-Pacific partnership committed to openness, freedom, and prosperity." Unquote. While our economic numbers are pretty good, not so bad, to be frank, it is my belief that they are really way below our potential, both trade and investment figures. But the good news is that we are jointly committed to improving this for the benefit of both our economies. We have re-engaged, and Honorable Tony Abbott just briefed us in more detail on that. We have re-engaged on negotiating a fruitful and enduring comprehensive economic cooperation agreement, or free trade agreement in common parlance. Since both sides, India and Australia, we both agree that it is time to take our trade and economic relations to a much higher growth trajectory. It is very ambitious what we are trying to do now with Australia. And as Mr. Abbott said, the timelines that we are hoping to achieve all this in, initially with hopefully an early harvest agreement, followed by a full CECA. Those timelines are ambitious, but it is good, I think, on both sides to keep the ambitions high and then to put all resources behind trying to realize that. I hope very much that we will see much progress in the coming months. But I must say that there's much more than just trade or increasing trade that beckons both of us, Indians and Australians. India is emerging as an economic powerhouse, fueling growth globally. We are already the 5th largest economy in the world, the 3rd largest in terms of purchasing power parity. And many of you would be aware of the most recent projections by the World Bank and the IMF that India will be the fastest growing large economy, both in 2021 and in 2022. And this is being powered by exploding growth in regions and parts of India that had hitherto been perhaps overlooked. Much of our growth is now happening. It's coming from our tier 2, tier 3, and tier 4 cities. These small cities are actually capturing 50% of the sales of Mercedes-Benz cars, 60% of the sales of Amazon, and 50% of the total digital wallet user base. These macro numbers are quite mind-boggling, frankly. We are also today the 2nd largest smartphone market, the 2nd largest steel producer, the fastest growing e-commerce market, the 3rd largest domestic aviation market, and our consumer durables, consumption of consumer durables is growing at 3 times the global growth, and we are clocking it at 18% every year. By that, the current market size will expand to double in just the next 3 years. Very recently, in fact, on our Independence Day, on this Sunday, our Prime Minister announced, and many of you would be aware, he announced a $1.3 trillion economic stimulus into our infrastructure construction. Now, all this, I think, I believe, should be very exciting news for Australian business. And I want them, therefore, to shed any old perceptions or prejudices that they may harbor They must appreciate that India today is actually an easy and welcoming place for business and one of the most attractive destinations for foreign direct investment. We have ushered in simplification and reduction of taxes, new labor laws, production-linked incentive schemes, and we have empowered institutional arrangements whereby we handhold new investors, and we'll be delighted to do that for Australian companies. Our infrastructure stands vastly improved and will improve further. We have today supply logistics and transportation speeds that are among the best in the world. And I am not surprised, therefore, that last year, even during the COVID pandemic, foreign direct investment into India did not decrease. There is also now, as I see it from my perch in Canberra, there is also now a realization in Australia that its future prosperity and security cannot rely on any single country. Similarly, Australian companies simply cannot remain producers and exporters of primary commodities only. They must also diversify into value addition and modern manufacturing, besides other markets for them. This is where the open and globalized Indian market of over 1.3 billion people, with almost 500 million people now having graduated into the middle class sector and therefore very high consumption economy, along with the new ease of doing business in India, all this opens up vast opportunities for Australian business. They can export more to India. They can also create value and supply chains with Indian end manufacturers. I think an excellent illustration of this potential would be in the lithium battery value chain. Lithium could be processed and refined in Australia. At the moment, there's hardly any of that happening. Australia is today the largest producer of lithium in its ore form. It also has the largest known reserves thus far, but very little is processed and refined over here. That could be done here, adding value, and the lithium can then be sent to India for manufacturing and assembly of batteries for use in our ambitious e-mobility plans for electric vehicles, as well as for very ambitious battery storage plans to ramp up our solar electrification sector. I'm therefore delighted also with the recent release of the Austrade report, which is entitled Unlocking Australia-India Critical Minerals Partnership Potential. It is something also that both governments have acknowledged holds great potential. Meetings are being held. There are joint working groups that are meeting, but I really want to enthuse actual business players, actual business decision makers to go ahead and do deals of the kind that I am outlining over here. There is also huge potential for Australian companies for investing in the booming Indian stock market. That has been setting new records now. Of course, there's always a risk when you are investing anywhere, but I can assure you that when you come to India with its very, very strong economic fundamentals, you can be rest assured of stable and long-term returns. And I think Australian superannuation funds ought to utilize this opportunity much more. One of them is doing it to an extent, but not enough and not all of them. Every speaker, when we speak about India-Australia relations, do talk of the strong linkages that we have people to people already. The Honorable Tony Abbott spoke about this, Jim Varghese spoke about it, Shiba, you spoke about it. It is certainly, very, very honestly, it is a living bridge really between our countries. And along with the Indian students, they do contribute immensely. And I'm proud of that. They contribute immensely to Australia and, of course, thereby to our growing relationship between our two countries. I hope, of course, and there are a sufficient number of politicians on our panel today, including a former prime minister. I hope very much that an early solution is found to bring back those of our students who have found themselves unable to return to Australia since the beginning of the pandemic. I do believe with the increased level of vaccinations, certainly in India, also now an increased pace here in Australia, COVID-safe methods can be found to, if not entirely open up, certainly to carve out special provisions and take special measures to bring back that specific cohort which has been struggling and suffering for a very long time now, which are the students struck overseas. But overall, I believe that today our strategic partnership is on a very, very sound footing, and the ground has been laid. The fundamentals are before us for its further deepening, its further expansion into the future. And I believe I will work for that. And I know that all of us here are committed to work towards that, a much, much more brighter future for our bilateral relationship. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Thank you for that very encouraging address and really providing a very good further context to Tony Abbott's address. Can I now take the opportunity to invite Julian Lisa to address us? As you can see from his profile, he has a very strong connection to the Indian diaspora in Australia, and Tony Abbott mentioned the 700,000 Indian diaspora plus, and is of particular note that he's also chair of the Parliamentary Friends of India. So what better person now to talk to us than the Honourable Julian Lisa? Over to you, Julian.
Dhanyavad Jim, namaste, mera naam Julian hai, mi barara loksab kshetrika sansad hun. Shri Jimvad Gis ji, Shri Tony Abbott ji, Shri Mantri Vora ji, Shri Shebanan Kirayo ji, Shri Anil Varma ji, Shri Jody Mackay ji, Ifran Malik Badayo, मैं AIBC को धन्यवाद देना चाहता हूँ. मेरे बराबर क्षेत्रमान 6300 से ज़्यादा Indian Australian है. मैं अधिक की कामना करता हूँ. Friends, it is wonderful to be here with you to celebrate the 75th Independence Day of India, to be with so many friends, and particularly to be with my great friend Tony Abbott here. I've had a Tony Abbott doubleheader today. This morning we sat on at a board meeting of the Ramsay Centre for Western Civilization, where we celebrate the contribution of Rome, Athens, Jerusalem, and London to the Australia that we have inherited today. And this evening, we are celebrating the contribution that Delhi, Mumbai, Bangalore, and other places will play in the future of Australia. I share and agree completely with the comments that Tony Abbott has made about the importance of the relationship. As both Tony and the High Commissioner said, the countries have a very important, proud and long history. The ties between us are deep. They go back before federation, before the existence of an independent India, to trade that occurred between Indians and the colony of New South Wales. But they were ties that were cemented on those battlefields during the First World War. And I'm proud in my constituency to have a cenotaph that commemorates the dozen or so Indians who actually fought in the Australian Imperial Force during that First War, as well as obviously the Indian Army itself that fought side by side in Gallipoli. You know, the world is in a very difficult place at the moment, and we're reminded about that by the events of recent days and the uncertainty of the pandemic. And so it was quite extraordinary in the context of the pandemic that one of the great rays of hope and sunshine, the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership, was born last year when it was signed by Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Morrison in that virtual meeting. This is, in many respects, the baseline architecture now for our relationship and for the many areas in which we're working together. Together, we're working to shape the future of technology. As the High Commissioner said, India is a technology superpower, and decisions that are made in India, given the sheer weight of numbers of digital consumers, they will really help shape the future of the internet, whether it is to be something that is free and open, or whether it is something that is to be full of censorship and control. And given the values of India, it is wonderful to have a technology partner who shares our values about the importance of freedom and openness. Australia is a critical minerals superpower, and we have the opportunity through things like lithium and through the other critical minerals to work with India on the future of technology, on the future of those supply chains. We don't want to see geopolitics cause shortages in minerals essential to the future developments of technology. And so last year, our Prime Ministers agreed to expand the resources partnerships and cooperate on those new technologies for the exploration and extraction of critical minerals. But it's not just in minerals that we're working together, it's in the important works that we're doing in oceans policy. India has led the world, particularly with its Pacific Oceans Initiative, and we've always been a great supporter of that. And our Pacific Step Up is very complementary to that work, building on the scientific research and environmental protection that's so important to our oceans, as well as the free passage and peace and security that's important in our area. I think the defence engagement has been so important, and I think it's the defence and strategic space that is really leading the relationship at the moment. In 2014, to give you a sense, there were only 11 joint defence activities, and yet the year before the pandemic, this increased to 28. The growth culminated in the Indo-Pacific Endeavour Joint Task Group travelling to India, the largest ever Australian deployment to India with over 1,000 service personnel for the AUSINDEX exercises, and the invitation last year, which we are now currently participating in Exercise Malabar for the first time. India's joined a very small group of countries which we do submarine exercises together. This is a sign of our close trust and cooperation. And I know Defence Minister Peter Dutton has said he hoped that India would join in Operation Talisman Sabre defence exercises, which will see both of our defence forces jointly exercising with our other Quad partners, the US, Japan, and others. And I think that Quad relationship is so important. And it was interesting that, it was really the first major international meeting that President Biden held in his new administration, was to bring the Quad leaders together to reinforce our commitment to a free, open, inclusive, rules-based international order in our region. And while strategic issues are leading the relationship, it's the economic modernisation which I think provides the great source of hope for all of us sitting around the discussion today. Yes, we have disagreements. We have disagreements with many nations on agriculture, and we would have loved to have seen India join RCEP. But India is changing, as the High Commissioner has outlined. Some of the economic reforms that India is going through and has been going through in the last few years are really quite staggering and provide extraordinary opportunities for Australia. As Ambassador Vadva, in his document, Australia Economic Strategy, has made an important contribution to that discussion, particularly coming as it is the companion piece to Peter Varghese earlier Indian economic strategy, which seeks to put India in our top 3 export markets within the next 15 years. The culmination of much of this, of course, will be the free trade agreement that Tony Abbott and Dan Tehan and others are really trying to work on and to see bear fruit. I think the appointment of Tony Abbott, someone as senior as he is in Australia, indicates, I think, the government's very great seriousness about the potential for a free trade agreement and the importance of this relationship. We can't pretend that these negotiations will be easy, but work has to be done to link our economies more closely, allowing both of us to diversify our trade and bringing our people and our businesses, as our security architecture has been, closer together. Over the last 20 years, the Indian community in this country has grown from 60,000 to 700,000 people. And in the next decade, the Indian community is projected to overtake the Chinese-born community and become the largest migrant community in Australia. Peter Varghese has suggested that in time, of course, the Indian diaspora will be as politically significant as the Irish diaspora have been. And I'm very proud to have a large Indian community in my constituency. As I said earlier in Hindi, I just wish I had more. The Indian community shares our values because India itself shares our values. Indian Australians are now making their mark in every field of endeavour: business, politics, sport, and the arts. And the Indian community plays a vital role in ensuring that that relationship is not lost in translation. As the chair of the Migration Committee, can I say I think skilled migration is an important part of this picture. We want talented, driven Indians to continue to bring their technical expertise, entrepreneurship, and, yes, High Commissioner, aptitude for study to make Australia home, while we want to encourage more Australians to choose to spend time living and working in India. As we work together strengthening our ties, I think one important step we should consider is a national foundation for Australia-India relations. We have a national foundation for Australia-China relations, which describes itself as a national platform that works across business, government, and communities to strengthen constructive engagement with China and build links across Greater China. But given our shared outlook and the changing relationship Australia has with India as compared to Australia and China, I think we need at the very least to have a counterpart foundation for the Australia-India relationship to strengthen engagement between our two countries at all levels across business and community. As chair of the Parliamentary Friends of India, I welcome and celebrate the unique contribution made by the Australian Indian community and look forward to the strengthening of our bilateral relations as India enters its 75th year of independence. Dhanyavad.
Thank you. Thank you, Julian. And thank you for some of those key messages in there, and certainly picking up that National Foundation for India. That's a good suggestion. I'd like now to invite Ambassador Vadpa to speak. Of course, he's needs very little introduction. He's very well known in Australia. It's made an outstanding contribution to looking at the Australia-India relationship, the Australia economic strategy, and of course, managing to link together the Peter Verghese report and his response to it. So over to you, Ambassador Anil.
Thank you very much, Jim. And I'm very encouraged by what has been said by speakers before me. It's really good to see how the relationship is now it's been set in the context of excellent geopolitical scenarios, and at the same time, the opportunities that India offers for Australia. And I think High Commissioner Manpreet Vora has already dealt with it in some detail. So for me, because of the fact that I concentrated a lot on the Australia economic strategy, I just like to make 5 very brief points in the short time that I have. First is that the investment-led trade enhancement will be much more sustainable in its bilateral relationship. I think $15 billion apiece in bilateral investments in each other's countries and the bilateral trade, which has hovered around the $30 billion mark at best over the past few years. These are both indicators that the potential has not been realized. Secondly, the big businesses in Australia who've been used to trading and dealing with China need to look at alternate markets. India offers a very good opportunity. Third, an interim agreement on trade in goods covering some of the bilateral trade tariff lines, and Honorable Tony Abbott referred to 100 of them, which covers 98% of our trade. This, I believe, will benefit both sides while continuing to work towards a comprehensive agreement. And we will, that of course is a better course of action in the circumstances to pursue. Services and investments must be worked upon in all seriousness if India is to be kept engaged in these negotiations as we go forward. And the option of phasing out tariff reductions will need to be worked out as well. Fourth, the reduced tariffs on rare earths and minerals, which are much needed for India's next generation production and programs, will definitely be attractive for India. Australia could also be accommodative in selected services areas like financial and cybersecurity technologies, cloud computing, labor-intensive services for its remote areas, which lack skilled personnel. And a limited FTA could cover critical minerals and technologies, pharmaceuticals, and chemicals. Final point, a CEO's business forum has not met for many months, and both sides need to devise a consultation mechanism to remove our barriers to trade and investment with both government and business representatives. They need to intensify their outreach and consultations with the people who are affected, especially businessmen, the investors, the stakeholders. And I think our discussions must start on things like rules of origin, dispute settlement mechanisms, barriers to trade, and trade facilitation, while we identify new areas of cooperation and services. Now that I believe, and I've written about it before, would also help us in easing our consultations with our common partner, Japan, in 2 or 3 selected areas where we could strengthen our collaboration on establishing resilient supply chains, which we've agreed upon with that country. So I'll end there. Thank you very much, Jim. You're muted, Jim. You have to unmute yourself. Thank you.
Unmute. Okay. My apologies. Sometimes technology gets the better of you. Can I thank you for that very concise outline, and also look forward to discussing the CEO forum with you further. I'd like now to take the opportunity to invite our sponsor and partner, and that is Harsh Shah. He's the India Services Group Leader for Deloitte, also a very active and strong supporter of the Australia-India Business Council. And it's really great to have Harsh here, in both capacities as a AIBC member, but also heading up Deloitte and our sponsor. Over to you, Harsh.
Thank you so much, Jim. Distinguished speakers, dignitaries, colleagues, friends, ladies and gentlemen, it's an absolute pleasure to be here with you today. Firstly, congratulations are in order to the Australia-India Business Council for bringing us together. It's a very hard period for people in both countries, both in here for us in Australia, as we are in lockdown for majority of the country, and in India as well. I really learned a lot from the comments made by the earlier dignitaries, learned a lot, but I'd like to now focus on and share a couple of things from our side, from a business perspective. India, as we've said before, has celebrated 75 years of independence. It is now nicely poised to take its rightful place in the new world order and in the Asian century. Australia has had a mixed history with Asia. From the early migration for the gold rush to the White Australia policy, to then welcoming refugees with open arms in the 1970s and 80s. And then taking the bold step to engage with China, as has been mentioned before, in the 1970s. A decision that has reaped rich dividends for the country ever since. It is in this context that we look at the Asian century and we think about India's role in the Asian century. We talk about the rise of India. As has been said earlier, India's economic growth footprint is increasingly spreading across the world. India's political clout is also increasing. All of this as we deal with the global pandemic, think about China's role in the new world, and contextualize, think about the new triangulation that my colleague in Deloitte Access Economics refers to, of economic growth, infrastructure, and security. India's opportunity in this context is well known to all of us. As His Excellency Manpreet Vohra mentioned earlier, India is already the third largest economy when it comes to purchase parity. The middle class in India is huge. When you add the India's population growth with rising incomes and the global reorientation, it is very easy to see why consumption is going to dominate trade in India. India has also done its bit in terms of global reforms and strategic reforms. Think about GST. Think about demonetization and banking reforms. Startup India, Digital India, Modi Care. All of these are examples of strategies that India has put in place to leapfrog the position in the global ease of doing business index. I think it is no longer a viable excuse for Australian businesses to put India in the too hard basket. We have to move quickly, and we have to be bolder than before. At Deloitte, we continue to work with our colleagues in India to solve some of our Australian and Indian clients' most complex business issues. Issues such as reduction in carbon emissions, securing rare earth and mineral resources for electric motor vehicles, and reimagining the global supply chain and transitioning manufacturing facilities into India from other parts of the world. But all of this is just the tip of the iceberg, and the opportunity here is much bigger. As Peter Verghese and Anil Wadhwa have outlined these opportunities in detail in their reports, I would just like to focus on two today, both from a business angle. The first is in the area of defense, where I think there is a large scope of cooperation between the two governments as well as the private sector. As we look at the security architecture of the region and we think about the maritime position in the Indo-Pacific, there is a great deal of cooperation that can be done between the two governments as well as the private sectors right through the supply chain. When we think about the skies, we think about launching satellites together, sharing of data. All of these present tremendous opportunities for both the countries. It is not going to be easy, but with a focus on the Five Eyes and the Quad relationship, India and Australia have a real opportunity to reestablish their global defense and strategic ties. For my second point, and again, this is something that has already been referred to earlier today, the focus and the success will be measured by how well we engage with the 700,000 strong Indian diaspora in this country. As we know, doing business in India is not easy. It is a very complex country for good reasons. But we have to do our homework and we have to address this market having go in with eyes wide open. Without a focus on the diaspora, without Asia-centric, India-centric thinking in Australian business boards and the C-suite, as well as the high-ranking executives in the public sector, we will really miss out on the true opportunity that presents. The comprehensive strategic partnership and the comprehensive economic cooperation agreement, or the FTA, are very welcome steps towards this direction. Ladies and gentlemen, India is moving. India is moving fast. It is not going to wait for Australia. The ball is in our court, and we need to act now. This is our defining moment. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you very much, Harsh, for that very erudite address and picking up some of the key issues. And before I invite our next speaker, I just wanted to say that we are receiving a few questions. This is an Australia-India address, so we don't normally take Q&As, and we do like to finish on time. However, we are very committed to answering questions. So if your questions are there, we will take them on board and we will answer them after the event. It's great to see such interest. I should like now to invite Jody Mackay. Let's be a profile. The Honourable Jody Mackay, the member of the Legislative Assembly here, member of the Labor Party. The AIBC prides itself on being bipartisan, and we've had very good relationships with both sides of politics. So I'd like to invite Jody to give her words on Independence Day and of course this event today. So over to you, Jody.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jim. I appreciate that. And can I just start by wishing everyone a very happy Indian Independence Day? I know that Independence Day celebrations have been disrupted enormously, but we have had our online events and, of course, this important event by the Australia-India Business Council. Look, there are a couple of things that I want to say, and they've been said by many of our speakers today, but there is enormous opportunity for us as a country, and particularly a state here in New South Wales. The global situation has changed. We've heard that. And I think having Tony Abbott as an envoy in India leading the way for Australia has just been a terrific announcement by the Prime Minister. But it also is very dependent, I think, and I want to pick up from our last Deloitte speaker, in recognising the importance of the diaspora in this bilateral relationship. And I can tell you, as someone who represents a significant Indian-Australian community, that they stand ready. The question for all of us, and I think why the AIBC is so critical in this discussion, is how do we motivate the diaspora and how do we take advantage when those borders open? One issue for me, and it's a difficult issue, but I believe it's an issue that governments need to take on, is how we bring our international students back. If we're talking about a bilateral relationship, if we're talking about how we work those people-to-people relationships, but also the money that's spent here in Australia and those lifelong connections that we make, then our international students are critical to that. I don't have the answer. It's a really plagued issue, but I would like to see us give greater thought to how that occurs. So as I said, our diaspora stands ready, and it's really exciting for all of us who are great supporters of our India-Australia relationship to know that we have government, our federal government leading the way. We've got Tony Abbott there as our envoy. We've got Anil Vadva, who has been a terrific ambassador and a great supporter of this relationship. And you have MPs like me and Julian who believe fervently in the potential of this relationship. So congratulations to the AIBC. I love working with you. I'm so committed to the work that you do, and a happy Independence Day to everyone.
Thank you very much, Jody. That was a very, very, very inspiring address for all of us. And we now come to the closing end of our very important Australia-India address, and a very quick reflection from the National Chair, listening to all the speakers. I really liked the reference from Tony Abbott about the longevity of Indian democracy, the fact that India is going to be an important superpower, the diaspora here of over 700,000, the commitment to make the FTA a reality. It's great that Tony Abbott has met with business leaders, think tanks, ministers, and of course that he has really opened up some insights for us. Looking forward to Dan Tehan meeting with his counterpart in the near future, the Quad Summit, and something happening there before the end of the year, and looking at the exports and also bringing some very practical things home, like the wine tariff of 150%. Now, as a great wine lover, I'd love to export some of our Australian wines to India. And of course, the quick pragmatic look at an early harvest agreement as a precursor to the free trade agreement. And of course, the CSP fleshing out education and technology, and the ease of doing business, the value chains and supply chains, and drawing to our attention, of course, lithium in batteries in the Austrade report. So I think what we're seeing here is are some very important messages that are being good through. And one of them is that it's not a zero-sum game, that 1/50th here of the population of Australia, and the commitment to the quadrilateral security dialogue. So thank you, and also encouraging us to be an advocate. Similarly, as we go with Ambassador Vora, we can see that we have some really important challenges ahead in terms of the economic numbers. Thanks for reminding us about Tier 3 and Tier 4 cities. And of course, how Amazon and Mercedes-Benz are doing well there, which is something new for us to learn. The fact that FDI in India has not decreased despite COVID-19, and that we're looking at the importance of modern manufacturing, the growing middle class, and of course, the ease of doing business. And drawing that important point about lithium in batteries in terms of our report, and drawing attention, of course, to the stock market in India and the care of our students. Similarly, Stephen, I think your points about the growing importance of India in our history now as we move forward, the technology superpower, the supply chains, importance of defense, and drawing to attention to the Indo-Pacific Task Force, and of course, the need for a national foundation for India. And similarly, as we go to Anil Wardva, I think the CEO Forum is very important. AIBC is very happy to advocate that, and we take your message on trade and investment. And Harsh, of course, you know, our 75 years of independence, the mixed history, we've got a leapfrog ahead. And it's very important that what we're seeing here is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of the relationship, defense, and of course, how our Indian diaspora works. And last but not least, Jody, a common point, we need to take care of our international students, emphasized by all our speakers, and importantly, motivate the diaspora to the enormous opportunities. And on that note, I'd like to hand over to our National Vice Chair, Shanuska, to deliver the vote of thanks. Now, you look at Shanuska's background, she is a pretty amazing person. Apart from working with Thomas Greer, she's also played a leading role here with the Australia-India Council. And of course, she was one of the 100 Women of Influence in Australia in 2018. So over to you, Shanuska.
Thanks, Jim. Jim is only a little bit biased, I think. But thank you, everybody. It's been a very illuminating, I think, session today. And it's certainly, I think, just re-energized us all. And at the AIBC, I know we will now be looking at an agenda for the next 12 months as to how we can advocate for and put into place some of the recommendations that came up today. I have the most important job today. I get to thank everybody. So I will start by thanking Tony Abbott. Thank you for your address and making time for us while you are in a lockdown or hotel prison. Manpreet Vora, welcome to Australia. I think it's my second time speaking with you, but it's been wonderful to have you speak to us today. Julian, always a pleasure. That foundation is something, as you know, the AIC is well behind, and will certainly be putting every foot forward that we can to make sure it happens. Harsh, always a pleasure. Thank you to Deloitte. Anil Badwa, I'm so looking forward to you coming back so we can have lunch again. It's not as fun when you're not here. Jody, thank you again for your lovely words. Shiba, for pulling this together, as you always do. Thank you for your wisdom and for your energy. To Janaki Eshwar, thank you for your wonderful performance. Our other distinguished guests, AIBC directors, and of course our AIBC members, thank you as always for your support. Special thanks to Wendy, to Vishal for the technology efforts, to Irfan, and congratulations on your new appointment as New South Wales President. And finally, last but not least, to Jim Varghese, thank you for all your efforts, for your stewardship, and for me personally, for your mentorship and for having my back at all times. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Shanuska, for that. And we're finishing pretty well on time. I always have a 5-minute lever, and we've just achieved that and packed a lot in. So I'd like to now officially close this Australia-India address and address 2021. We do have a couple of events coming up that will come up on your screen. Please take note of that. And particularly thank our event partner, Deloitte. And our next one is, of course, going to be in agribusiness. And that's as early as the 19th of August. So I ask you to have a look out for that. And on that note, I would like now to formally close this Australia-India address. Namaste, and have a great rest of the day wherever you are.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.